From the St. Francis Yacht Club in San Francisco, this is the Wednesday Yachting Luncheon, hosted by Ron Young.
Welcome to the Wednesday Yachting Luncheon, live from the virtual grill room of the St. Francis Yacht Club. We hope that you and yours are sheltering in place in a comfortable environment, and we look forward to greeting you back in the grill room just as soon as conditions permit. A couple of years ago, my youngest daughter, Christina, she came back from a safari in Africa and said, "Holy cow, Dad." It was very powerful and inspirational, had an emotional effect on me, and made me think a lot about the purpose of life. And we've had a few speakers before speak about safaris. I thought it was time for another talk on the fascinating continent of Africa. Our guest speaker today is Hugh Coppen, founder and CEO of Tasimba, a safari company. But there are more than that too. And Hugh has some insights into other benefits you might get in a trip to Africa. Hugh, welcome to the Wednesday Yachting Luncheon.
Thanks, Ron. It's a pleasure to be here.
I know that you're also a sailor and you've sailed. When was the first time you ever got on a sailboat? What kind of boat was it?
I got on a 51-foot sloop in Cowes in the Isle of Wight when I was fresh out of college, and I learned sailing on that in some of the best waters of the world in the Solent.
So Hugh, where were you born?
I was born in the UK, and I moved out to Africa with my family when I was 6 years old. I had all my education there, and I graduated from the University of Cape Town with a pre-law degree, and decided that one thing I didn't want to be was a lawyer. So I moved to the UK and started my career there, and then went on to Canada before I came to San Francisco.
When you say your career, what was your early career?
I was in marketing, and then I ran, in total, I ran 3 different companies in manufacturing, both in Canada, the United States, and one in the UK.
So you watched the end of apartheid, it sounds like.
I did. I lived through, I was being educated during the apartheid years, and then I did see the end of apartheid and was happy to see it go.
Give us the experience as a citizen of watching Mandela come out of prison and ultimately be elected president of the same country that imprisoned him.
Well, I go back even further than that, because I was at school, at college in Cape Town when he was imprisoned to start with. So, and I remember that was the main occupation, was watching that treason trial. We all figured that he would actually be executed, and fortunately he was not. So when he was released, it was like the beginning and the end of that cycle, and the end of apartheid couldn't have come soon enough. I wasn't living there at the time. Then I was living in Canada when it ended, but I kept going back to Africa all my life. I've been going back. So it's as if I've never left. But I lived and grew up in Zimbabwe, not in South Africa.
So during the Truth and Reconciliation sessions, essentially, and that process for the country, talk a little bit about the process and potentially the value of the process.
When I was growing up there, I never could believe, and never would have believed, that there would be a smooth and almost bloodless transition from apartheid to democracy, because it was so inbred in the country that apartheid was, that you couldn't possibly imagine that it could somehow be transited. And so the Truth and Reconciliation process, which was sort of the culmination of Mandela's magic and the capacity of him and de Klerk to come to a solution and to get through that process of transition without it being a bloodbath. The Truth and Reconciliation Commission, I think, had a lot to do with how South Africa got over the worst of apartheid.
From us observing it from afar, a bit of a catharsis for the country to come to grips with the bad that had been committed during the period of apartheid, but also to cleanse the country of that and to sort of put it decidedly in the past.
It's true, and that's what it did do. It had that effect. Unfortunately, obviously, there's always going to be those who will hold out and resist that. But at the same time, it was truly an accomplishment to get to that, and to have that whole period in which they were called the Rainbow Nation, and that era of South Africa rejoining the world in every way, including in sport, and in the United Nations and in politics and everything. So for me, it was wonderful to see that country come back into the world fold.
How did you make the transition from a career in marketing and then manufacturing to using some of the lessons of life to take people on safaris? How did that transition happen?
Well, having grown up there and been on, I don't know how many hundreds of safaris altogether in my life, I learned one very important thing. On every single safari I've ever been on, there is something new to learn. There is something that we can learn from nature or from the wild animals or from insects or from some aspect of nature. There are things we can learn from. And so I always knew that. And then several years later, and we were actually consulting in South Africa. And I said to them, have you guys ever been on safari? They said, no. I said, I want to take you. And we went on safari and we sat around the campfire and said, there's so much to learn here. They said, we've got to figure out a way of bringing people out here who have curiosity, and they are serial learners. They want to gather more information. They want to learn more rather than just going on a safari. And that was the roots of my company, Tasimba. That was in the around 04, 05 era, but it took I was busy with other stuff, and it took until 2015 before I actually created Tasimba as this company where people can go and get a whole lot deeper immersion into Africa than just going on a photo safari.
Great. Tell us about Tasimba.
Well, Tasimba is a company I set up specifically to provide what I had learned to be the best attributes of safari, but to do so in a way that engaged people very deeply, so that, for example, when we go on safari, we take over an entire safari camp. It's a small camp. There's only 9 rooms, but we take over the whole camp, and we're there for a solid week, 7 full nights. So immediately you get a deeper immersion because there's not people coming in and out, and our guests are there with 2 professional guides for the entire week. And these guides are able to take them deeper into an understanding of nature and everything that they're witnessing. And at the same time, we then hold a daily indaba, which is an African word for the traditional meeting, around in a circle under a tree, out in the bush, and we talk about what we're experiencing. We talk about the inspiration people are getting from being in the wild. We talk, and we take that into the next step, which is, how does that turn into our purpose? What is our purpose for being or for living? Because inspiration is what is needed to give us a purpose. And then the purpose, when we act on it, is the impact we make. And what it's really all about is, what is the impact you want to leave behind? What is the message? What will be the mark that you leave when you are gone? And so we're talking about helping people see through and get their own purpose and leave their own mark on the world or in their community or in their situation. So inspiration, purpose, and impact really is what this presentation is about. The first point I want to make really is this, that there's a lot we can learn from nature. Nature can teach us so many things, but one of the most important is resilience. Think about it. Nature suffers through fire, flood, drought, disease, plague, and always regenerates itself and always becomes healthier. Well, let's face it, over the last 2.5 years, we've had to learn a lot about resilience. And human resilience hasn't always been that strong, but we have had to learn a lot of resilience in getting through this whole COVID thing. And it has been a life-changing event. And when you have a life-changing event like that, what it tends to do is to create fresh inspiration. So we've got a lot of people who everything in their lives has been challenged. All the things we took for granted got turned upside down. And here we are now, and people are asking themselves, what's really important for me? Am I living the life I really want to live? What's my purpose in living? And we've got so many people. I'm seeing it in my consulting and leadership practice, but we're seeing it also people who are coming on safari. And that is, COVID made them rethink a lot of the things we took for granted. So the purpose of this presentation really is to be inspired by what we can learn from nature. The world's probably greatest physicist says, look deep into nature, and then you will understand everything better. You know that nature's got a lot going for it if Albert Einstein says that. So what I'd like you to do while you're watching this for a moment is just to think of an event or an occurrence that changed your life. Something that happened, good or bad, something that was wonderful for you or something that was deeply traumatic, but something that resulted in changing your life. To a large extent, for a lot of people, that's what COVID has done. And so it's inspired us to do something differently. And that something often leads, that inspiration leads to a new purpose. And our life consists of a lot of purpose. We change our purpose as we go, from wanting to graduate, to wanting to start a family, to wanting to achieve more in our career or with our family. And constantly our purpose is being adapted and changed. So achieving your purpose needs action. And when you drive your purpose into action, that's the impact you leave. Here's a lovely quote that we often use. If you can't figure out your purpose, figure out your passion, for your passion will lead you right into your purpose. By which I mean, it's passion that really drives us to want to do something differently. So purpose and passion are very closely related. And that's something which we certainly have seen in all that we do. First, I want to talk about some inspiration you get from watching wildlife and what they do. I mentioned resilience a minute ago. Here are some elephants. They're in a dried up riverbed. This is late in the dry season, and elephants need a lot of water, about 40 gallons a day, each adult elephant. They've learned that there is water underneath the dried up riverbed. There's a water table there. So they dig down, they probably dig down 1-2 feet using their front feet or their tusks sometimes, certainly their trunk, and they drink right out of that water. Let me turn that video on and you'll see what I mean. Here's the one on the closest one to us, and she's busy drinking there. By the way, there's a couple of impala behind and they're waiting for the elephants to move on. And then there goes, she squirts that water into her mouth and she moves on. And another one comes up, takes a look at it, and the first one decides, no, I don't want that. And here comes another of the family. She goes in and decides, oh, this needs a little clean out. So she's going to throw out some dirt. And Junior comes along and says, I don't care what's there, I'm going to drink it anyway. But this is showing resilience when the elephants actually create water holes for themselves and use that knowledge to be able to survive the heat and the dry of the end of the dry season. Here's 8 roan antelope, and they're standing in a row as if they're watching a parade or watching a lion go by. Now you say, well, why aren't they running? And this is a very good reason. Animals first will check if there's a predator in the area. They will check and see, is it a threat to me? Because animals are very, very careful about using the energy they've got. They want it available when they really do have to run. And they don't want to run unless it's necessary. And in this case, it's not necessary, because what they noticed was that this lion is limping. Here's the story. This lion was in the pride and they were trying to bring down a large buffalo. And in the course of that hunt for the buffalo trod on this lion's paw and broke bones in her foot. She couldn't run anymore with the broken bones in her foot. And if you can't run, you can't hunt with the pride. If you can't hunt with the pride in the lion world, you get kicked out of the pride. And so she took her 1-year-old cub and went off and lived alone. Now she had to teach herself a whole new way of hunting, because she couldn't hunt. The only way she knew was in a pride of 10, 12 animals. Now she's on her own. So she learned how to hunt by stealth, lying in the tall grass, waiting for an unsuspecting antelope to come by and then just springing on it, or lying in the bushes. And she grew, and her cub grew to adulthood, and she's still alive and still learning and still hunting like that. What she did was she adapted to the hunting style that leopards use, because that's what they do. They're solo hunters, not pride hunters. So she learned without talking to any leopards, but she figured it out. That's adaptability. The third aspect that I wanted to talk to you about of inspiration from the wild was how they will help each other. This is a female baboon, and you'll see in a moment when I start the video that she's got an infant who is clinging onto her chest. Now, normally these are small infants that cling on there. You'll see in a minute, she's got a large one. And so it's a heavy burden she's going to climb up that tree, because she wants to get away from what may be perceived as a threat. So the tree has no bark, so it's got no good handholds, and she's going up. Now, I want you to watch carefully what happens as she gets higher up here. There, see that hand coming down? There's other baboons up in the fork of that tree, and they're pulling her up to safety. So there is this collaboration in the wild of animals where they will do things to help each other. Our inspiration comes differently. And what we see when people come into the bushes, we see them inspired by some different things. But I want just to preface this by a quote that David Attenborough made at the beginning of a very recent video he did, when he said, what we do in the next 20 years will determine the future for all life on Earth. That was, he said that about a year or two ago. So we're 18 years and counting, I guess. But the first thing that people are amazed by when we get into the wilderness is the space, the size, the sky, the horizon. And I remember one guest arrived on the drive-in from the airstrip, which is about 90 minutes because we keep stopping for wildlife. And he had tears streaming down his face. And I said to him, "What's wrong?" He said, "I'm just so incredibly moved by this amount of space, the wilderness, the peace, the serenity, the quiet, and the animals around in their natural habitat. It just is so incredibly inspiring to see this." So space and just wilderness being what it is. Here's a late summer shot. The grass is tall, it's green, it's lush, it's full of nutrition, and a single track going off into the distance. There's a big storm brewing, which is going to come in and bring more rain. I mean, the wilderness has this capacity to just embrace you with the amount of space that's around you. The place we go to is a 250 square mile wilderness, which is private. There's no other vehicles there, and there's a very few other camps there. So it's you feel like you're the only people there. At the same time, on the plains, you'll see a vast mixture of animals. Here we've got an impala herd in the front with some young ones. You can see some very young ones there. The eland right behind them. Vultures sitting up in a tree because there's been a kill nearby and they're waiting for their chance. And kestrel flying overhead. I mean, there's animals everywhere when you're in a true wilderness like this. And then you have other magical moments like this one. I took this about 3 weeks ago on safari in Africa. And these two elephants came down to the river and decided they wanted to cross over. And at sunset, as the sun is literally setting behind the escarpment on the far side of the river, they crossed over in front of us and held their trunks up, which is normally what they're doing is they're sniffing the air. But this was like a salute to a magnificent sunset. It certainly was inspiring to all of us. Let me move on to purpose. Purpose in the wild and for wild animals has two parts to it and only two. One, survival. Two, to breed, to survive the species. Let's talk about that. I told you that elephants need a lot of water, 40 or so gallons a day. And what happens as the dry season, which usually goes from March until November, as the season gets longer and longer, the water holes dry up. And when they do, then the elephants have to go looking for water. Each elephant family is led by a matriarch who will generally be between 40 and 50 years old. It may consist of a couple of her sisters. It will certainly be some of her daughters and their juveniles and their calves. So it may have 4 generations in a family like that. But the matriarch will decide, and she will lead them to water, which may be 40, 50 miles away, because she remembers when she was young that her matriarch in a very bad drought led her family there. So this is part of that survival instinct, saying, whatever it is, we need water, and I will lead my family can get water.
Do we know how the female elephant or the leader elephant, in any case, knows where to go to get water? How does they know? Is it memory?
They talk about elephants have a long memory, and that she talks about, she knows and remembers where it is. And so she will lead her family to that water hole. And they may have a long, 2 or 3 days of walking to find it, but they will get there and she will lead them there. Here's another aspect of survival. These are 5 beautiful zebra at sunset. Now, they're not just looking at the sunset because it's pretty, because that's what we do as human beings. They're looking there. And when you see animals all looking in the same direction, that means generally means there's a predator out there. And what they're doing, like I mentioned for the roan antelope, they're seeing, is this a threat? Do we need to run? Do we need to use energy or not? So part of the survival instinct is to really be aware, 360 degrees awareness of what may be dangerous, be picking up signals like bird sounds or baboon barking or impala warning barks or other things to help alert and help trigger your alertness so that you know if you're a zebra, when you have to run, or whether or not just watching and you're keeping your distance and you know that you're okay. So that's again part of the survival instinct. When we were there in this last month in May, it was the rutting season. Now the rutting season for impalas and for wildebeest is when all of the females come into estrus at the same time and are ready to be bred, because they all want to drop their lambs or their calves at the same time when the grass is new and fresh. And all of them giving birth at around the same time creates many, many infants, and therefore reduces the risk of losing a lot of small and brand new lambs and calves to the predators. So they have this mating season. Well, of course, if there's a mating season, that means that the guys get into the action. And a male will gather around him a group of maybe 15 or 20 females. It's called his harem. And that will be his harem. And he has one job, and that is obviously to cover as many of them as he possibly can. But at the same time, there's all kinds of other males hanging around the fringes, trying to lure some of the females out of that harem, or better still, trying to lure him out of the harem. And so you get these head-butting contests between the males. And one male can generally only hold on to a harem for about a week because he's so busy with his number one duty, but then also fighting off other males. He doesn't get time to eat, and his condition deteriorates. And sure enough, a stronger, younger, fresher male comes in, and he takes over. And he may last another week. The rut will only last 3 or 4 weeks. So there may be 3 or 4 males that will, in fact, be cycled through that herd so that you get a good, very good mixing of the gene pool in each season of the rut. That's the breeding impact. When you come to other animals, bigger animals like elephants, size matters. The big bulls get the action. They are the strongest in the gene pool. And that's what the females want to ensure the survival of the species, is to be mated with the strongest of the species. Same with a big, strong male lion who has the pride. In the animal kingdom, that's where that survival and breeding instinct comes from. Let's talk about human purpose. This whole question of why do I exist? What's my purpose for being here? We only get 80, 90, 100 years if we're lucky to do something, to accomplish something, to leave our mark. What's my purpose? What's my legacy going to be? I have a couple of quotes for you. Here's one. Don't ask yourself what the world needs. Ask yourself what makes you come alive. And then go and do that, because what the world needs is people who have come alive. And here's another personal favorite of mine. The meaning of life is to find your gift. The purpose of life is to give it away. In other words, find your gift, find what it is that is your purpose, and then make sure that you are then giving that and helping that and sharing that with others. It's that whole notion that we talked about with the baboon going up the tree and the helping others. It's in the animal kingdom, and it's in our world too. When we go on safari, we have a daily indaba. A daily indaba is where, in this particular case, we're sitting around, everyone's got a mug of coffee, we're on camp stools, and we're about to talk about either the inspiration we've had from today, or what purpose that's inspiring in people, or what purpose people are starting to see themselves have and what they want to do about it. So it's a meeting of trying to pull together all that we're learning on safari and then sharing that with each other in order to get the benefit of it. But another part of that inspiration is when we take our guests on a walk, literally in the wild, where wild animals have been. We'll see their tracks on the ground: lions, leopard, hyenas, wild dogs, and where all kinds of other animals have been: antelope of all sorts, zebra, elephants. So we're walking in their space, and we're trusting these professional guides to be and to have our life in their hands. But you will never feel more alert and more completely in the moment than on a walk like that, because you realize, I am now out of my comfort zone. I'm in the wild, I'm in the wilderness, and this is a moment I can really treasure my existence and my ability and the privilege to be able to walk through the same country and through the same part of the wilderness that the wild animals do. Here's another part of inspiration. Very, very hot day. There was a long parade of elephants, and a parade of elephants is when one family after another was coming to the waterhole, which is just over to the right of this photo, right in front of camp. And the camp has this little pool. I mean, it's 10 feet wide by 20 feet long. And all the elephants were heading to that. And 2 of our guests are sitting there in the pool on this really hot day. It was around 100 degrees. And they're sitting with their feet in the water, just watching it. And all of a sudden, this one family, led by the matriarch, she's the one at the back, came right towards them in the pool. And they looked around to us to say, what should we do? And we said, stay there, just stay there. This is a moment you'll never forget. And they sat there, and this family of elephants came and drank right out of the pool, 20 feet from them. And they were in so close to the animals that they said you could not only could you smell them, you could almost see the tiny little folds of their skin and their long eyelashes. So for them, that was a magical moment of inspiration and of giving them a sense of, this is so crucial, this is so precious to us. We've got to do what we can to preserve the spaces and the wilderness for the wildlife of the world.
So that water didn't have chlorine in it, and it was safe for them to drink.
That's perfectly true, and that, but they will drink almost any water. I mean, they'll drink. Sometimes they'll drink really muddy water because it's the only water there is, and somehow they've got a system which allows them to get the benefit of the water and get rid of the dirt. But no, this is pure water from an aquifer underneath the camp, and the camp filters it a bit for guests to drink, but the elephants don't need that filtering. They're happy to have that, and for them, it's even nicer water than what's in the water hole because no other elephants have tramped through it. So moving on then to impact in the wild. And I want to talk about two things here: keystone species, and the other is Africa's iconic keystone species. Keystone species are those species which, because they exist, it creates a beneficial outcome for others in their ecosystem. And if they didn't exist equally, that ecosystem could collapse. So it's because they exist that part of the rest of the ecosystem thrives and provides sustenance for others in that ecosystem. Let me give you an example. Right here off our California coast, sea otters, keystone species. Sea otters, as you can tell from this fella, love sea urchins. And so sea otters go dive down, bring up a bunch of sea urchins, and then lie on the surface and munch away. Well, why are sea urchins why do they need to be kept under control? Well, because you know that our kelp forests are and have been under stress in the California coast. And they've been under stress because the sea urchins have multiplied. And what happens when the kelp forest dies down at the end of a season, and then before it grows up, the sea urchins cover the sea floor, and so the kelp forest is unable to grow. And when you don't have kelp, you don't have the nursery for many, many species that use the kelp as a sheltering area, or for the young of other fish or animals that are in the water to use as shelter while they grow and until they're able to hold their own out in the open water. No kelp, therefore, means no nursery, and that is a problem for several of the species in the ecosystem. Another one that I'm sure you're familiar with is wolves. In 1924, all the wolves were wiped out of Yellowstone. And for the next 75 years, or 70 years or so, the elk population just exploded, with the result that they were competing for the same vegetation, and so destroying certain types of vegetation. They were also destroying a lot of the natural water flows. And so the elks had changed the ecology. A lot of birds no longer had their natural habitat. 12 wolves were brought in I think it was 95. Now about 600 of them there. And the elk population, nicely managed. The vegetation is now balanced off again, has come back. The birds are back, the beavers are back. The ecology in Yellowstone has been brought back into balance by bringing in these keystone species. So Africa's keystone species, you probably knew I was going here. Elephants are a keystone species in Africa for several reasons. One, elephants make the pathways that become the game paths through tall grass or through the forest. And why do elephants make the pathways? Because the old saying goes, and all the animals seem to know it, every elephant pathway leads to water. In fact, the camp we usually go to is called Linkwasha, and Linkwasha means elephant paths. So the first thing they do for all the animals, that then becomes a game trail, because the other animals know they don't need to go bashing through the forest. They just follow an elephant pathway and they'll find the water hole. Secondly, elephants have a great capacity to keep the forest from continuing its encroachment over the grasslands. So they preserve the grasslands by preventing young trees from growing over the current edge of the forest and into the grasslands. They keep the grasslands whole, and therefore all of the grazing animals live well on the grass. But perhaps the most important one is elephants have an incredibly inefficient digestive system. I mean, 70% of what they eat goes right out the back door. Well, that's not good, but here's the good part about it. Elephants also love seed pods of all sorts, acacia seed pods, or even the palm tree seeds, large seeds that come down off the palm trees, not the coconuts, but these are seeds that grow on the palm trees. They just love them. Often they don't crunch most of them, they just swallow them whole. Those seeds go through the 16-hour nice, moist, warm oven and come out the back door in a large ball of dung, which is nice and moist. It's their own, it's those seeds, their own manure. And elephants are sometimes called Africa's gardeners, because not only they clean up the edge of the forest, but also they're planting new trees all the time, or new vegetation by the seeds that they're planting and dropping. In many parts of Africa, there are palm trees there that were not indigenous. How did they get there? Just by millennia of elephants eating them in one place and dropping the seeds somewhere. Then that tree grows up, eat the seeds, and the elephant moves on, and the droppings created another palm tree. The elephant dung also itself is a great source of nutrition for a number of animals. Birds, insects, and in some cases baboons even, will sort through. This is an old elephant dung, but it's been sorted through. But look at all the seeds that are there still. So that's another example of, again, how that species is providing sustenance and providing conditions for other species to survive in the ecosystem. So I have a question for you. Are humans a keystone species?
Good question. It sounds like we're not a keystone species for animals. We're a keystone species for business. It seems to me that we're destroying pieces of the earth and making it more difficult for other species to exist.
Exactly, Ron, you're right on it, because that's exactly what we are. If you look at the ecosystem we operate in, the climate and the planet itself, we're much more of a parasite than we are of a keystone species. We're not doing things that help it survive. Our footprint is something that is causing a lot of destruction. So the answer, you're quite right, is no, we're not. But here's where I want to go. We can become keystone individuals. What do I mean by that? I mean individuals who act and have the same consequences as if we were a keystone species. So they're inspired and passionate, driven by purpose, because the purpose comes from the passion. And then they act on their purpose with impact for the benefit of others. There's that same definition of keystone, but now I'm saying, but it can apply to each one of us. We can be keystone individuals. Let me give you an example of one. This is Dr. Angel Zimbiza. She's a Zimbabwean woman, about 35 years old, doctorate from Oxford University in lion behavior. And now she set up her own NGO. She lives in Zimbabwe. She came into camp with us last month and was absolutely intriguing and inspiring to our guests, because what she's doing is she understands that when there are communities near the wildlife areas, there's this constant imbalance, or this constant threat of what's called a human-animal conflict, that the wildlife can come out of the wildlife areas, elephants, for example, and destroy overnight a family's entire crop for the year. That's what would feed that family for the year. Or a lion comes out from the wildlife areas and kills one of their cattle, or a goat. But that's their wealth. The wildlife that they have is their wealth. So the livestock they own is what they need. That's what they negotiate with. So what she's doing is, through natural solutions, is helping the communities repulse and prevent the communities suffering that way. So the communities won't put out poisoned meat for lions, won't shoot the elephants. For example, one of the things that they're doing is they mix up a brew of buffalo dung with chili powder and chili paste, and then bake it and forms a hard sort of cake. And then at night, they light one of those close to where the crops are, and it smolders through the night, and the elephants don't come anywhere near it. They hate the smell of chili. So she's doing a number of different things like that. And it's wonderful work she's doing, because it's helping the wildlife not be killed by the villagers or killed by the communities, and the communities not be harassed and not suffer at the hands of wildlife. Here's another couple of keystone individuals. This is Tendai Katai on the right and Mike Neone on the left. They're two pro guides. In Zimbabwe, it takes between 6 and 9 years to become qualified as a professional guide. The qualifications and the steps through that process are so intense that in 42 years, because it started in 1980, these qualifications, less than 200 people have ever qualified as pro guides. And our guests get the benefit of 2 of these extraordinary people. But what makes them Keystone individuals? Well, they have absolute passion for what they do. They're the first ones up in the morning because they can't wait to get out on safari to find out what changed at night, what happened, what did we find? They do it every day of their lives, but they're as passionate about it as if it was the first day on safari. And then they have this purpose, which is they want to share everything that they can with us as guests and with our guests. They want to share that because they want to inspire our guests with this same passion for preserving and for conserving the wildlife, and with a passion for Africa. And they do it admirably. Perhaps one of the greatest Keystone individuals of all, Jane Goodall. You cannot get through a single day without having an impact on the world around you. What you do makes a difference, and you have to decide what kind of difference you want to make. Closing, I just want to say this. Our legacy as humans is not the material things we leave behind, because that's not a lasting legacy of ours. That's a legacy then becomes somebody else's in our family or whatever happens to the material things. Our legacy is what we will be remembered for, what people will say about us after we're gone, how we touched and impacted others, how we gave lasting meaning to our lives. And so my question for you as we bring this presentation to an end is, what's the legacy you want to be remembered for? Here's Zanda, one of Cecil's sons. We sat with him for about 45 minutes. He was just posing for us. He'd been on a walk, on a patrol of his territory. He was now lying beside the track. He kept on looking at us saying, how many more pictures do you want? Okay, I'll give you another shot. We just wanted to share this thought with you. May the wonders of nature inspire your passion, and your passion inspires your purpose and guide the impact of your legacy. That's my presentation, Ron. Thank you.
Great, Hugh. First of all, give me some details about your travel logistics.
Okay, we start and end our safaris in Victoria Falls. Why? Because it's closest to the main and the best of Zimbabwe's safari areas. But secondly, because it is one of the 7 natural wonders of the world, and if you haven't seen Victoria Falls, you should see it because they are absolutely incredibly breathtaking and stunning. So we start and end there, which means people have to then get there by international flights. Now, as we come out of COVID, more and more flights are starting. You can actually get to Victoria Falls with 1 stop between San Francisco and Victoria Falls. There's a new flight right out of Frankfurt, which is nonstop into Victoria Falls. So that's step 1. And there's a carbon footprint, which we all face, and we all can do some offset for it. In terms of camp itself, the camp is a semi-permanent camp, meaning that each of the rooms is built on a platform which is raised off the ground by piles. And then the tent structure is a metal structure, but it's all canvas tent and a canvas roof. The purpose of it being semi-permanent is this: the concession that Wilderness Safaris has to run and operate that camp is for a period of time. And part of that concession says, if you don't renew it, you must remove all traces that you were ever here. And so the camp must be able to be completely moved, and then the natural site will regenerate. For the rest of it, we are operating off the national grid. But interestingly, the power coming into camp, you don't see a power line. And 7 miles from the nearest main transmission line, they dug a trench 7 miles long to bring it into the camp and into the national park. The vehicles are still diesel because there's not enough power actually to keep a electric vehicle going for sometimes for the length of time the vehicles are around. So the vehicles are diesel powered. But other than that, all of the food and all of the provisions are brought in once a week. And when you're in camp, you say, how is it we managed to eat so incredibly well? And the logistics of that are extraordinary. And that in itself is like a military operation as to how they bring everything in. And you would never know that, there isn't a shop around the corner or a supplier who's delivering fresh food every day.
What's a typical team size or safari visitor size?
Our optimum size is between 8 and 12. That's the good number for us, because 8 to 12, you get a good mix of people. The interesting thing is a lot of these people never knew each other before they got there. But when they do get there, they gel so quickly because of the thing you mentioned, Ron, and that is they all come with a curiosity. They're all serial learners. They come because they want to learn more than just going on a photo safari. And so because of their natural curiosity, they have that in common. They find and they meet people who think like them.
What do safaris cost?
It depends on which one. We have two safaris. We have our Explorer, which is 6 nights in 2 different camps. And we have our Signature, which is 7 nights, all in the one camp. But the Signature safari is 15,000 per person in shared accommodation. The 6-day safari also has a day in Victoria Falls, and that's 14,000 in shared accommodation. Both of them have a supplement, a single supplement of about 15 to 20%.
What's that mean, a supplement?
Well, it means that if you're in the camp and the room on your own and there's nobody with you, then it costs you, there's a premium to be paid for that.
A shared accommodation means 2 people in it.
2 people in a room.
What's the average age of people who participate in your safaris?
I would say 50 to 55. We've had people as young as my partner's daughter came with us both as an intern, but as a guest at 24. And we've had, I think the oldest, other than me, would have been early 70s, mid 70s.
Are the animals in Africa and the safari regions becoming accustomed to people?
In the national parks, they are accustomed to the vehicles. So they are not spooked by the vehicles. So they don't run away. In fact, you can get incredibly close to them. And that actually is part of what the guides do. And the guides will almost always, they will come as close as they can without actually then becoming threatening to the animals or without that becoming upsetting to the animals. And they will very quickly pick up on the signals. If an elephant is distressed by how close we are, the guides will know not to come any closer. But for the most part, they're accustomed to the vehicles. They see this green thing with sort of squishy bits on the inside, but they know that the green thing probably doesn't taste very good, so they're not very interested in pursuing it or in doing everything. And in fact, the lions will walk right past the side of the vehicle. The temptation is that when a lion is doing that, to put your hand out, say, and stroke it. That's not a good idea, but that's how close to the vehicle they will come. On a walk, I've been, and we've been within 8 feet of elephants. We're behind usually take some shelter behind a fallen tree or something like that. And the elephant will come up and we'll walk right by and pretend that he or she didn't see you. We know perfectly well he saw us all along. He knew we were there, but because we were no threat and because we were absolutely quiet and observing and being no threat to him, he just went on walking by. Lions, as I say, literally have come within two feet of the vehicle. So the closeness is, again, a part of the ability of a really great pro guide to be able to know when it's okay to do that. And, you know, for some people, that gets to be uncomfortable. We had a guy who was he was one of the people who around the campfire was the storyteller and the gung-ho guy about everything. And he was scared out of his gourd of lions. On the first day, when the lions were close to the vehicle, he lay down flat on the floor. By the third day, he was sitting upright. And by the fourth day, he was saying, okay, let's get a little closer. So, you know, it depends. Different people then get to realize it's safe, and it's quite safe. And at night, elephants will come through camp. Buffalo will come through camp. Lions will be in camp. And you just know when you're in your room, you don't go out after dark without a guide. We know we're living in their space, but at the same time, they're fine. They're accustomed to it to that extent. If you stepped out of a vehicle with a pride of lions nearby, you're going to be in trouble. So it's not that they are habituated and they're now in some of these semi zoos. That's not how they are. They are still wild, and so we take all the precautions of that, but they are not threatened by us.
What are the age range of your guides?
The guides are all, I would say, high 20s would be the first pro guides. There'll be learner guides who'll be in their low 20s, their young 20s. They'll join maybe in their teens even. So the pro guides will be at least 27 or so. The oldest guide that I can think of is probably 55. The guides themselves are just so passionate about helping people see and have the best experience that you trust them. And one of the most important things we found is you take business leaders, people who are used to being the boss and having their own company or being the president or being a CEO or division head or whatever, and we bring them there. And in the first couple of days, they have to learn. This is out of my comfort zone. I now need to trust a guy who I didn't even know 2 days ago with my life. And that's a very good experience for people who are in positions of authority and power or in our world, going there and learning, we all can find somebody who knows more about something than we do. And it's a very good learning experience.
So how experienced are the guides? How many years of experience average guide have?
A pro guide will have a minimum of 6 years. Some guys never get to make it to pro. I'll tell you this, how their final, what they call proficiency, is a 5-day safari that they are required to rent all the equipment for a mobile safari and a chef and the food, and take 3 examiners on a safari in an area they have never been before. And it's 5 days. And these 3 examiners will be asking all sorts of questions about the wildlife, about nature, about trees, about shrubs, about everything that's there. And sometimes we'll be testing them. Other times we'll behave badly like a guest may, sort of wandering away from the campfire at night or something like that. And what they're being tested for is their ability to be able to know and have all the answers, to lead a safe safari, and to be able to gently bring a guest back into the fold, saying, you can't do that. You need to stay close. If we're on a walking safari, you need to stay close to me. And the privilege, by the way, of running that proficiency, it costs the guide, the would-be guide, about $5,000 US dollars to actually run that 5-day safari. And that's out of his own pocket. So he's the one who's paying the money, and he's the one who may or may not get his pro guide license. So their experience is extraordinary. You would not believe, Ron, just how much those guys know. There's virtually no question you can ask them that they don't know the answer to it. It's a privilege to travel with people who are so knowledgeable about every aspect of their profession and what they do.
What are their English speaking skills?
Very good, because that's part of it. That the ones who have more difficulty with English, they have a hard time getting to the pro guide status, because one of the things that is required is to be able to communicate clearly enough in English, even though it may be accented which is natural for all of them, but even though it may be accented, but clear enough that even people who are not natural English speakers can understand most of it. So you get a lot of German or French or Swiss or Scandinavian travelers, and they can all understand because the guides are proficient enough in English.
Tell me a funny story from a safari.
I can tell you a story which was what led to the start of Tasimba. And that was, we were walking on an island in the middle of the Zambezi River I'm saying 20 years ago. And we were actually playing a little bit. And we were standing at a termite mound in a large clearing of probably 100 yards across. So we were right in the middle of this. And we were just talking about the termites and which are fascinating species anyway. And suddenly the guide looked over my shoulder and said the one thing that I'd never heard before and hope never to hear again, and that is, oh, epithet, run now, that way, fast. And I looked over my shoulder, and there were 11 elephants, and they were already running, and they were now running towards us. They'd been scared by something, and they were running. And we all ran. It was before I had my knees replaced, so I was the slowest. The guide, therefore, couldn't go any faster than me, even though he was capable of running a lot faster than me. I stopped behind another termite mound, and he said, no, back further. So went back. I stood behind a tree, which is probably this wide, thinking, well, the elephant can't see me now. And the female kept coming. And the guide actually did a really smart thing. With his rifle, he shot at the termite mound just as she approached it. So it exploded in dirt. He shot at the side of the termite mound. So it exploded in dirt, and she stopped dead in her tracks. And this guide, a little guy, probably 5'6", 5'7", took his hat in one hand, his gun in the other hand, his arms above his head, and he walked towards her the 20 feet, and he was shouting at her and calling her names that I wouldn't repeat in public anywhere. Well, the net result was she kicked the dirt and took off. And the moment for all of us was, it was a huge adrenaline moment, but the understanding was that they had been spooked somewhere else and now they were taking it out on us. And we think we know what had happened back there. Some fishermen had obviously tried and done something to scare them. And so these elephants now we were now the people who'd scared them. So they were coming after us. Her family moved off, but she went on coming at us. And when he stopped her, he said, I had to take the immediate offensive, the immediate advantage, and pretend I'm a lot bigger than I really am by the noise I'm making, by how I'm trying to make myself bigger, my hat in one hand and my gun in the other hand, and by shouting at her so that she knows that I've now taken the advantage and I've come towards her. He said, if I had stood where I was, she would have come back on, she would have come onto us. And he said, I would probably have had to bring her down. And the one thing a pro guide never wants to do is to use his gun in the national park, because you do that and you can very easily lose your license. Why? Because you allowed it to happen. You allowed it to happen that you needed to use your gun. And so, although they can, and they've had to learn how to shoot, it's the worst thing for them to have to do.
So Hugh, it's been fascinating to listen to your story and all about Tasimba. If people want to get a hold of you, I trust they can reach you at the email address that's on screen right now and or give you a call. And thanks so much for speaking to us about, the meaning of life and how safaris help people get a better insight into their meaning and their life.
My pleasure, Ron. Thank you so much for giving me the opportunity. I've enjoyed it. As you can tell, I kind of like talking about Africa. And so thank you so much for the opportunity.
Thanks for being our guest on the Wednesday Yachting Luncheon. With that, we
This has been a presentation of the Wednesday Yachting Luncheon.